first, I want to talk about that fight against obesity and the obesity crisis we are seeing here in the UK, because it ain't going too well. Ministers have been warned that their efforts to tackle Britain's obesity crisis are likely to fail because the public are constantly bombarded by unhealthy food options. Now, Britain has one of the highest obesity rates in Europe, with 2 in 3 adults either overweight or obese, and the NHS spending, get this, the NHS is spending £6 billion a year treating obesity-related ill health, a figure which is forecasted to rise to £10 billion a year by 2050. Well, the government has announced plans to introduce a 9 p.m. watershed on TV when it comes to advertising bad food, and a ban on paid-for advertising online for unhealthy food and drink, plus new restrictions on the promotion of unhealthy food and drink in retail outlets and online. But yeah, so far, when it comes to that fight against obesity, it looks like the government is losing that because of the fact we have bad food available 24 hours a day. Let's get more on this. Joining me now is Jason Reed, head of Young Voices UK. Good to have you with us, Jason. Were you shocked by this?
I'm not shocked by this, but that's only because we have this kind of story on a loop every month or so, where we have a renewed panic about how obese everyone is. I'm afraid I really don't buy into the narrative. There are various problems with this. First of all, the way that we measure obesity, especially in children, doesn't make much sense at all. If you look at some interesting Institute of Economics Affairs research on this, which shows that it seems, when you look at the stats, that children are losing a huge amount of weight between the ages of 14 and 16. But in reality, that's not the case. It's just that we measure childhood obesity very differently to the way we do adulthood obesity. And so you look at
what's the difference? Yeah, Jason, what's the difference in how we measure obesity in children and compared to adults?
So for reasons that are very unclear, they insist on using body mass index figures from decades ago for children and more recent ones for adults. And so it's clearly outdated data. And so you look at the statistics and it seems like we have a childhood obesity epidemic, but it's just because of the way we're measuring obesity. Having said that, obesity is definitely going up in this country. It's now responsible for, I think it's right to say, more deaths than tobacco every year for the last few years. But at the same time, I don't buy into this narrative that it's a problem that needs to be solved and that overweight people are just waiting for the benevolent hand of government to reach down and help us. Everyone pays into the NHS equally. And so, yes, the NHS does spend a few £1 billion every year on dealing with obesity-related illnesses, but that's exactly what it should be doing. That's what it's for.
Yeah, but £6 billion, it really feels like this is something which could easily be avoided if we just made better choices when it comes to eating. But yeah, £6 billion, that could be money best spent better elsewhere in the NHS, surely.
Well, when it comes to education and information and resources, I've got no problem at all with helping people make the best informed choices that they possibly can. The problem is that when this kind of story emerges, you always have the same small group of interventionists, think tanks and campaign groups who are pushing the same tired policies that just don't work, like advertising restrictions, like sin taxes on sugar and salt and meat, which simply don't work. They always hit the poor harder than anyone else, because if you're rich and you can afford to live off of, vegan, organic peace beans, you don't have a problem with there being a sugar tax. Whereas if you're a working class mother trying to feed a family of 5, that extra few pence you're spending on chocolate is going to add up when you're doing your weekly shop. And with advertising restrictions, it's a similar story. You mentioned the 9 p.m. watershed on junk food advertising. The government's own research into that policy, so not some skeptical third party, the government's own research into that policy predicts that it will remove about 1.7 calories from kids' diets per day.
Really? You're kidding? That's nothing.
That is absolutely true. That's half a Smartie for context, so nothing at all. It's going to make no difference. And of course, that's going to then cripple the broadcast industry, the advertising industry, the food industry, just when we need economic growth more than ever as we come out the other side of the pandemic. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
What about the banning of junk food adverts during children programming? Has that made any difference at all? Do we know?
Well, it seems from the data that it makes very, very little difference, because this comes from a misunderstanding of the way that food culture works. It's not the case that we see a burger advert and our brains immediately, I have to have a burger because I've seen that advert, we make our own choices, and that includes kids. Of course, they have parents to act as a filter, that they don't have burgers 3 meals a day for every day. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense. It comes from this very particular mentality that we all need to be patronized, infantilized. We all need to be talked down to. No one is surprised that chocolate has sugar in it, and that if you eat a huge amount of chocolate every day of your life, you're going to end up with diabetes. We don't need advertising restrictions to protect us from the evil of unhealthy food. We're all adults. We can all make our own decisions. And Boris Johnson used to sign up to exactly what I'm saying. When he was elected to the Tory party leadership in 2019, he talked about the need to roll back the continuing creep of the nanny state. And now it's his government that is pushing through new frontiers when it comes to nanny statism, especially on the question of obesity. And I find that profoundly disappointing. And I think many other Tory members like me do as well.
So, Jason, do you think that the government should not act in any way at all when it comes to dealing with the obesity crisis? It's a huge deal. It's thought, I mentioned £6 billion a year being spent in all of this in the NHS to help people who have the health issues that come with being overweight, but increasing to £10 billion, you can easily argue the government can't just sit there and let that figure creep up to that £10 billion figure.
Well, there's a cost and a benefit to every decision that the government makes. And it seems that the costs of these kinds of interventionist policies are much, much larger than any benefits. If we really want to tackle obesity from a government standpoint, there are ways that we can do that. There have been some interesting experiments around the world. There was one experiment in the US where shopping trolleys had yellow tape added down the middle with some writing on them saying this section of the trolley is for fruit and veg and this section is for everything else, to try and incentivize people to buy more healthy foods. Okay. And that alone, without making anyone's shopping bills more expensive, without restricting any advertising, increased fruit and veg purchases by 50%. Wow. There was a similar experiment in Iceland where the children's TV program Lazy Town, which calls fruit and veg sports candy in that program. Sports candy,
my gosh, I remember those days.
Exactly, yeah. They partnered with some supermarkets and they rebranded fruit and veg as sports candy to get kids more interested. And again, there was a huge uptick in the purchase of healthy foods just as a result of that. There are plenty of things we should be looking into, and which innovation and science are producing some interesting results that can have a real effect on people's health. Sin taxes and advertising bans and other 20th century policies like that, they have never worked and they still don't work. And I don't know what point we're going to learn that and move on from them.
What do you think of the emergence and rise of takeaway apps, Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eats? This surely hasn't helped in all of this. Just you don't have to go out to get your takeaway anymore. I mean, sure, you had some restaurants delivering, but on the whole, if your kid turned around and said they wanted McDonald's, you've thought, oh my gosh, I've got to get out, walk or drive there. No, forget it. Now it's like, yeah, sure, let's just order it one of those apps I mentioned.
Food delivery services like that are an amazing example of how the free market and capitalism and innovation improves all our lives. And of course, it doesn't necessarily make people fatter. You can order healthy food just as easily as you can order unhealthy food. During lockdowns, it was a lifeline for many people who had to shield or they had to self-isolate, and they were able to keep feeding themselves very easily in that way. It's very easy to villainize.
You say that, Jason. There's one advert to one of those those food delivery apps, and in it they've got one of their drivers just in a room with people who's going to order food, and he just lists through all of the takeaway foods that they could order. And I tell you what, not one of them was Aunt Sarah's vegetarian veggie house hot shop or whatever. It was all your bad, your McDonald's, your KFC's, your whatever, all your bad takeaway foods.
Well, if the free market says that that's what people want, I don't really see a problem with that. And I certainly don't see
it's not going to help the obesity crisis, is it?
But then once we start going down that road, what's the end point? Because we can always point at things people do and decisions they make and say that's costing the NHS money. But then the end point of that is we all live miserable lives eating grey sludge just in case we take any risks at all that risk us having to go to hospital at any point in our lives. I think the much better thing to do is just allow people to make their own decisions, If you want to have a burger, have a burger, especially at this time of year. The last thing we need is people poking their noses over our shoulders when we're trying to eat some dinner and say, have you thought about the health consequences of that? Leave me alone. After the 2 years we've had, frankly, I don't want to hear it.
Okay, I think I know the answer to my next question here, Jason. But what about then? There was some suggestions that when it comes to choosing foods that could be bad for your health if eaten in huge consumption, yeah, choosing foods which could be bad for your health, putting a sort of a picture, a label which could show the damage that said food could have on your health, very much in the same way we see those pictures on cigarette boxes, when you see the pictures it could have in terms of the damage a tobacco could have on someone's health. What do you make of having very similar pictures on bad food?
Well, the smoking example is an interesting one because when you look at case studies around the world, all the evidence shows that people quit smoking when they want to and when they have the resources from health services in order to do that. They don't quit smoking because they've learned for the first time that it's harmful, because a packet has told them so. And it's exactly the same with food. There was a recent headline from one of these interventionist obesity campaign groups saying that people are bamboozled by the sugar content of various foods and chocolate bars. I find that incredibly patronizing. Everyone knows that chocolate has sugar in it. We don't need to be told, we don't need it shoved in our face that these foods contain fat or they contain sugar. We already have the traffic lighting system on food labeling. I think that's a good thing. I think we should keep that. It gives you some important information about salt content and so on. We don't need more down this road to make our lives that little bit more miserable, where you have, a picture of a diseased organ or something when you try to buy a burger.
What do you think in terms of that understanding, that knowledge, the education surrounding the addiction of sugar? Some saying it could be more addictive than cocaine. Is that not something, again, the government should be working on getting that message out there?
I'm afraid that's just nonsense. Sugar isn't more addictive than cocaine. Everyone eats sugar. Everyone needs sugar, in fact, nutritionally. And it's the same thing
You
again,
need
isn't
sugar
it? It's the government.
nutritionally, really, Jason? What does sugar give us?
Well, you need blood sugar, don't you? You need, I think it's 90 grams a day is the recommended quantity that adults are supposed to have. But it's more of the same kind of the government talking down to us and saying, oh, look at the poor working class folks. They can't tell when to stop eating sugar. They need us to help them out. I just think we need to be left alone. I think we are all capable of making our own decisions. And if we want to treat ourselves, or if we want to have a different lifestyle than what the Whitehall bureaucrats think we should have, we must have the right to do that. It's not their right to be interfering in our lives like this.
So yeah, this new report showing that when it comes to the obesity crisis, things are going to be getting worse. You don't think there's anything the government should be doing to step in that?
I'm not convinced that there's anything more, certainly in this area, when it comes to obesity, when it comes to interventionism of taxes and bans. This is not the way to go. We should be talking about obesity. It's an important issue. We should be looking at those innovative, interesting new ways I was talking about, of giving people more information and giving them that helping hand to make the choices that when they want to, and make changes when they want to. But we certainly should not be trying these policies that have failed again and again and again, which are just going to have the same results. And when it's the last thing we need right now, both for the economy and for our physical health and for our mental health.
All right. As always, Jason Reed, head of Young Voices UK, good talking to you.